So our next speaker is Damian, who's also another collaborator. He'll be okay. I will let Damian start his talk now.
Hang on. Let me
So I've been working with Damian for years now, and this is our latest work together.
I forgot to share my screen. May, could you please enable screen sharing? Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. So thank you, May, for that introduction. Once again, I'm Damian, and I'm presenting my work together with May. So today we're going to talk about these crossover transitions in a bus car mixed traffic cellular automata model. So to start things off, I know that all of us have been cooped up for far too long inside our homes. We've had a brief period where we could reflect on how much we miss traffic jams. But with the recent announcements now, we might have forgotten what it feels like to see traffic jams or what traffic jams even are. So let's ask the question, what are traffic jams and what causes these traffic jams? We know from a long time ago that we hated these things. No? So some people would say that traffic jams are caused by buses that do this. No? They fight each other for passengers on the road, and then they drive with disregard for other drivers on the road. So you cause jams like this on EDSA. Other people would say, traffic jams are caused by a lot of people eating up the road itself. So you have these commuters waiting for jeepneys, and then they're spilling on the side of the road. And that eats up the space that's designed for vehicles on the road. So you have traffic jams. Other people would say traffic jams are caused by all of these construction stuff that we do every time on good roads just so we can have better infrastructure. Or traffic jams could also be caused by simply bottlenecks or areas of the road where you have a reduction in the number of lanes. So a group in Japan actually tried to show what causes traffic jams, and the results that they found were pretty surprising. So let's look at this video.
Japanese researchers conduct a real-life experiment that shows how some traffic jams appear for no apparent reason. They placed 22 vehicles on a single track and asked the drivers to cruise around at a constant speed of 30 kilometers an hour. At first, traffic moved smoothly, but soon the distance between cars started to vary and vehicles clumped together at one point on the track, where the jam spread backwards around the track like a shockwave at a rate of about 20 kilometers an hour. Real-life jams move backwards at about the same speed.
Okay, so this clip is very interesting in that the instructions were simple. The instructions to drivers were to drive at 30 kilometers per hour and to try to maintain that speed for as much as they can. And what the Japanese researchers saw is that there were these phantom jams, or jams that would emerge without any apparent reason other than there being cars on the road. And these phantom jams would propagate backwards endlessly throughout the whole system. So when modeling traffic, we want to have a model that has these realistic properties. And one simple way of doing a traffic model is to use what's called the Nagel-Schreckenberg model. It's a fairly simple model. It's a cellular automata. Cellular meaning it is discretized in space and time. So you have these cells that represent about the size of a vehicle. Okay, and then your road is divided into many cells, and then each vehicle in this model will obey 4 simple rules at each time step. So vehicles can either accelerate, they can decelerate to avoid bumping into each other. There is this random slowdown probability, which makes the model much more realistic, adds some randomness to it. And then, of course, vehicles move forward at every time step. So the combination of these 4 rules can be visualized in this very distorted simulation that I have. So I have an animation of the model running for you. And you can see there is this clump of vehicles that's slowly moving backwards. That is your phantom jam. So if you take snapshots of this road at different points in time and then stack them on top of each other, you get a plot that looks like this. This is what's called a space-time diagram. So on the x-axis, you have the road in space, and then the y-axis is the evolution in time of the road. And each dot on the diagram represents vehicles on the road. And then we can see these regions where you have these diagonal dark bands. And these dark bands are actually backwards propagating shock waves. These are the phantom traffic jams that we observed in the previous experiment on the giant ring. So that's all well and good. We have a traffic model that recreates some of the properties of real life traffic. What we wanted to do at the very beginning of our collaboration with May is that we wanted to try to model the different quirks of Philippine traffic. So he said, what makes Philippine traffic very unique? Well, it's pretty disorganized, it's pretty chaotic. Maybe it's because we have all these different vehicle types, and then you have all of this swerving and lane changing. So that's something that we try to incorporate into our modification of the Nagel-Schreckenberg model. So we proposed a heterogeneous model where you can have 2 vehicle types. For simplicity, we call them motorcycles and cars. And then we added lane changing into the model. So the rules are pretty much the same as the original Nagel-Schreckenberg model, except that we have this new rule, which is lane changing. And then what we found was that if you look at allowing different vehicles, different fractions of different vehicle types to change lanes in the system, when you have a system that's composed of all motorcycles, if you let any motorcycle change lanes, the end result is that the system overall starts to move faster. So the black line here represents your baseline Nagel-Schreckenberg model where you have no lane changing. And then allowing motorcycles to change lanes always results into a positive speed benefit. On the other hand, when you have cars, which are larger vehicles, allowing them to change lanes sometimes actually has a negative effect on the system. And it's only rarely that there is a positive effect on the system. So what's happening here is that motorcycles, being small, are actually great space fillers. They're able to filter between unused gaps on the road, therefore maximizing efficiency by changing lanes. On the other hand, cars, as they try to change lanes, so they're trying to change lanes maybe to overtake a slow-moving vehicle. But in doing so, they're actually blocking off multiple lanes behind them. And when that happens, the rest of the system actually slows down. So if you have large vehicles, lane changing actually comes at the expense of other vehicle speed in the system. So this is the result that we got in our first 2 papers. But then we said, okay, these things, they're behavioral things and they're nice. We can model the behavior of vehicles in our in Manila, but it doesn't seem to tell us ways where we can concretely change the system, because it's difficult to change drivers' behaviors. So we said, we're probably missing something. And what we realized that we were missing is that uh, the problem of transportation isn't about getting vehicles from point A to point B. It was about getting people, commuters, from point A to point B. So what we were missing was the public transportation aspect of this model. So we did just that. We have added a new vehicle type to the model. So we added buses to the model. These buses could be any form of public transportation, be it jeepneys or tricycles or whatever, but we just want to call them buses for simplicity. And then we also have the commuters. So we have a sidewalk uh, at the top of the system. And then at the sidewalk, commuters can spawn with an arrival rate of alpha. And then all of the rules are pretty much the same, except we just added a rule for buses to interact with these commuters. So when a bus stops beside a commuter, the commuter can board the bus, but the bus has to stop. So this is a simulation of what would happen in the single lane case, where you have uh, 11 cars and one bus. So when you start the simulation, you would see that the bus is stopping because it's picking up passengers. But as it picks up passengers, the, the vehicles behind it start to form a bunch. So that's what's called a bunch or a platoon. And this brings us to the notion of your phases of traffic. So with this model, you could observe 3 phases of traffic depending on the parameter values that you set for the model. So you can have the free flow phase. And in the free flow phase, which is on the left, you can see that all vehicles are moving at their maximum speeds. There is minimal interaction between vehicles. There's almost uniform spacing between all of these vehicles. In when there are more vehicles in the system, you will have congestion. So congestion looks like the space-time diagram of the Nagel-Schreckenberg model, where you had the phantom waves. So in a congested phase, you will have stop and go waves, which is seen by these dark bands that move backwards on the road. And then with the addition of buses, you have this third phase, which is called platooning. So in platooning, you have this characteristic image where you have large gaps of empty space appearing between different platoons of vehicles. So the question is, what parameters, values of parameters, would result in these phases of traffic? So let's backtrack a bit and go back to the phases that we observe in the Nagel-Schreckenberg model. In the Nagel-Schreckenberg model, we can observe free flow and congestion. And they're separated by what's called the density phase transition. If you plot the velocity of vehicles in a system at different densities, you would see a plot that looks like this. So if you start with a low density would have almost no vehicles. So there's a lot of space for vehicles in the system, and these vehicles can always travel at their maximum speeds. If you increase the density of vehicles little by little, you would still have vehicles traveling at their maximum speeds. But then beyond a certain point, which is called rho critical, the speed begins to drop. So we have free flow at regions below the critical density, and we have congestion at regions above, sorry, that's a typo, above the critical density. And these phase transitions are important because what they tell us is that small changes in density can result in large change in behavior in the system. So this is something that we want. The problem here is that the critical density, theoretically, for your Nagel-Schreckenberg model is somewhere at around 0.16. And this is a very, very small number. So what this tells us is that reducing vehicle demand is the only solution for traffic. And that kind of sucks because our city is at a state where it's not that easy to reduce vehicle demand without some major pushback. Okay? So what we saw in our traffic model with buses is that we have another type of transition, which we call the crossover transitions. So if you look at the plots of velocity as you change alpha, which is the arrival rate, you can see that if you increase alpha, the velocity suddenly drops in some regions. So if you look at this green band and this region here, and then we plot the space-time diagrams for values above and below the green lines, we get pictures like this. So if you have alpha equals 10 to the minus 2, you can have this picture on the left. And then if you have alpha is 10 to the minus 8, you can have platooning in the space-time diagram. And what we see is that if you decrease alpha, or you decrease the demand of passengers, you can actually dissolve the platoons. So building on that, we actually saw that, okay, at different densities, the alpha at which the platoon dissolves seems to vary. And we looked at that and we found this relationship wherein there seems to be some exponential relationship. Logarithmic rather. So what this result is promising. What this result tells us is that you can have platoon transitions that occur at densities above the critical density. And then finally, we did one more thing with the bus model. So in the Philippines, we have our public transportation vehicles. They can stop at any point on the road. And that behavior is kind of interesting because our commuters are lazy just because there's no real incentive for them to walk through the harsh heat of the sun. But this load anywhere behavior actually induces platooning. And not only that, it increases waiting times for passengers in the system. So what we see is that if you actually space out the stops more, you can mitigate platoon formation and reduce waiting times for passengers in the system as a whole. So to wrap things up, what we saw in our model is that we had this critical density. We had these platoon transition densities that occur above the critical density. And to take advantage of that, what we could do is to do something like implement bus schedules that can manage your demand, therefore lowering your alpha, and reduce passenger waiting times. Another thing we can do is to have your stop placements. So you can space out stops far apart such that you can reduce platoon formation. But of course, we don't want these stops to be placed too far apart because that would be mean pedestrians would have to walk much longer to get to their end destinations. And with that, I would end my talk. I would like to, of course, acknowledge our funding institute. So we did this project under the CARI, which is the Philippine-California Advanced Research Institutes under the Commission of Higher Education. And thank you for listening. And I would answer your questions later at the Q&A session.
All right. Thank you very much, Damian. So for those who are just joining us, feel free to ask your questions at the chat box. But if you'd like to ask them later during the Q&A session, that would also be